Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Top Non-conformities and Trends in BRCGS Food Safety Issue 9. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select Phone Call in the Audio tab and the dial-in information will be displayed. LRQA will share a recording of the webinar with everyone who has registered in the next couple of days. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Any questions that we do not have time to answer during the session will be responded to you after the webinar. For your information, we will be running some live polls today. Please note that the responses are anonymous and the results will only be shared as a percentage result. It is now my pleasure to introduce your speakers for today. Foram Mehta, Technical Product Manager for Food at BRCGS, and Mark Fincham, Technical Product Manager for Food at LRQA. Foram Mehta is the Technical Manager for Food at BRCGS. She has around 17 years of experience in various food safety roles in areas of food manufacturing, auditing, supplier management, and much more. Mark Fincham has worked for LRQA for 31 years as a food assessor and technical manager. He has carried out assessments against both BRCGS and FSSC, whilst currently he manages the BRCGS standards and is the product technical manager for the food safety standards in LRQA. Prior to joining LRQA, Mark worked in the meat, frozen food, canning, and bakery industries for a number of manufacturers, including Campbell's and Bird's Eye. Okay, before we get started, we have our first poll. So I'm going to put that up on the screen in just a few seconds. Okay, you should be able to see it right there on the screen. Just a reminder, the responses are anonymous and the results will only be shared as a percentage result. So I'm just going to be read out the first poll, that is, where are you in your food safety certification journey? And you can select all that applies. And the options there are: curious about BRCGS food safety, implementing our BRCGS food safety management system, preparing for our BRCGS Food Safety Issue 9 audit, and or already certified to BRCGS Issue 9. We're going to give you a few more seconds there to vote. We can see your answers coming in. Thank you very much for your participation. And we're going to close the poll and share the results with you. So we can see the top answer there with 50% already certified to BRCGS Issue 9. Thank you very much for your answers on that. And I will now hand over to Foram to begin her session.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am going to start with a quick introduction to BRCGS. Okay, too fast. Okay, so about 27 years ago, in 1996, the British Retail Consortium, who are a trade association which are made up of all the retailers in the UK, they set up a working group of the British retailers, and their aim was to improve food safety in the UK. Now, these British retailers, they have their own brand ranges, what you call private label, and they're quite important to their businesses. And it was very important for the retailers to protect these private label products, which is why they established their own methods of demonstrating due diligence. So initially, the BRC standards, they focused on developing food safety standards. The first food safety standard was introduced in 1998, and this set a benchmark for best practices in food production. And as a result, it became globally like a globally recognized certification scheme, offering assurance to retailers, manufacturers, and consumers that products meet the stringent quality and safety requirements. Today, BRCGS is no more a part of the original trade association. It is a part of the LGC group, which are a global leader in the life science tool sector in clinical diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, research, government, food safety testing, and so on. And the mission of this group is to improve brand confidence through rigorous supply chain assurance. So basically, BRCGS, we have a heritage in British retail, and we've evolved over the last 25 years into a range of global standards. So you can see on the timeline here that BRC, as it was called at that time, they developed a range of standards for all the different steps in the supply chain. From it starts from the farm gate to the end user. In 2000, GFSI benchmarked the food safety standard. In fact, it was the first standard to be successfully benchmarked by GFSI. And then in 2016, these standards were sold to LGC, and LGC continued to develop these standards. And now we have, all these new standards as we know them now. We introduced various tools to strengthen the supply chain and help get sites certificated. So we've got training, software solutions to help with topics like ESG, culture, risk, and so on. Other than the food standard, our packaging, storage and distribution, and agents and brokers standards are GFSI benchmarked. And our ethical trade and responsible sourcing standard is benchmarked by SSCI, which is the GFSI equivalent for ethical standards. So moving on, you can see some numbers on the screen here. We are a truly global company. We have more than 33,000 certificated sites across 130 countries. We work with about 77 certification bodies. The number changes a little bit. 2,500 auditors, and the number on the bottom there, $8 billion of sales. So that's the amount of product which is kind of affected by BRCGS certification. So that's a very big number there. So we do pride ourselves in being market leaders on third-party certification services. So moving on to Food 9. Food 9, the standard, you can see some of the timelines here, was published in 2022. And the audits against Food Issue 9 started on 1st February this year, 2023. So we've got about 10 months of audit data, so non-conformity data really, and we're going to have a look at all of that when we get into the non-conformities bit of it. Just a few more stats around Food 9. We have over 15,000 certificated sites across more than 110 countries. And like I said, since audits commenced in Feb this year, more than 100,000 non-conformities were raised. It's actually more than 110,000 non-conformities that were raised and corrected. So essentially, we had that many opportunities for improvement. So that's a big number over there. Okay, so moving on to our topic. The top non-conformities for Food Issue 9. So there's a couple of things I want to say before I actually go into the top non-conformities. So like I said, we're analyzing data from 1st Feb. So it's about 9-10 months of data. But you may be aware that there's always a lag between when an audit is completed and when it gets uploaded to the directory. So there will be, some sites that the data has not still been uploaded. Also, generally, you would want to see a year's worth of data to see if there's any significant trends. But we still have enough data to get some meaningful trends out of the non-conformities. Another thing I want to say is we're going to only look at minor NCs today, is because the major NCs are comparatively small in number to show significant trends. So, for example, if you had even 100 major NCs for a clause, it still makes up for a very small percentage of the sample set. So we're going to look at minor NCs, but I would still like to briefly mention the top most commonly occurring major NC in the Food 9 audits, and it is 1110. So this clause states that where a site is certificated to the standard, it shall ensure that the announced or blended announced recertification audits occur on or before the audit due date indicated on the certificate. So we're basically saying that it is the site's responsibility to ensure that the recertification audit is scheduled before the audit due date. Now, from these NCs, because this is the highest number of major NCs, we're seeing that this is not happening. It could be something as simple as, site admins not completing paperwork or something else that prevents the certification body from organizing the audit. Now, if there is an error from the CB side, then the site will not be penalized. So if it's a CB error, the site do not get this major NC. But if the site fails to arrange the audit on time, it's a substantiative failure to meet the clause, and therefore, as a definition of major NC, the sites get a non-conformance, a major non-conformance. And we want the specifiers to know that the audits are happening on time, so we generally do not allow late audits. So I will move on to the next slide. Okay, there it is. So these are the top 5 minor NCs raised against issue 9 so far. So something to note here, so these are the top 5 most commonly occurring NCs. So except 462, there has not been any changes to the clauses from issue 8 to issue 9. So what I'm trying to say is these are not new requirements except 462. So we go into each of them in a little bit of more detail. So the top conformance is 411.1, which is the hygiene and housekeeping clause. So it says that the premises and equipment shall be maintained in a clean and hygienic condition. And I just want to point out here that for storage and distribution, the hygiene and housekeeping clause is the second highest number of NCs. Even for packaging materials, the hygiene and housekeeping clause is the highest number of NCs in the last 12 months. So it's not just the food, we are seeing this across our different standards as well. And for food, this clause relates to hygiene of premises and for the equipment. So it covers kind of both of those areas. So I think it's the complexity of operations or the high volume of production, supply chain challenges, turnover or shortages of staff. I think all of these factors can affect hygiene and housekeeping on site. Or is it something that because it seems simple and less critical, it may be overlooked, especially in non-production areas or surfaces that do not come in direct contact with food? But cleanliness is really important across the entire premises. I would also say that knowing your site is really important. Make sure you know what's behind that machine, because the auditor is going to check that roof voids, hard to see or reach areas, and in enclosed systems, if there's any dead legs in your pipe or things like that, they're very important. You should kind of pay attention to some of these things. Okay, so moving on, the next or the second most highest number of non-conformities are against clause 4911. Again, the clause wording is mainly unchanged, and this is about chemical handling. So I've seen things like, failure to keep the chemicals store locked when not in use. There's not sufficient labeling, especially if you're decanting from like bulk containers to smaller containers or containers for use in specific areas such as production. Sometimes there's improper storage or inadequate or missing bunding. So these are some of the issues we're seeing around this clause. It also seems that sometimes sites are struggling to understand how to dispose empty chemical containers or leftover chemicals. I think a lot of this information should be made available to you by your suppliers on the MSDS. If you have any doubts, I would say just get in touch with your supplier. They should be in the best place to advise you. Also, concentrate on training in this on the staff for handling chemicals, chemical containers. Another common trend, I think, is access to chemicals which is not restricted, and unmarked chemicals detected during production inspections. So it's important to ensure correct storage of chemicals when not in use, preferably within a secure chemical storage space with limited access only granted to trained personnel. Again, if you're seeing these NCs like around chemical handling raised at your site during either internal or external audits, maybe consider adding this to your hygiene and fabrication checks. So, just that you are on top of this issue, and, also do root cause analysis that you get to the bottom to prevent recurrence. The next one is 462. And like I said, we've done a substantive update to this section. So the whole section 4.6 and all its clauses 461 to 467, these were all introduced as part of issue 9, and it's around equipment, and there are different clauses which relate to old equipment and new equipment. So I would say it's not a surprise to see a few more NCs at the first audit, because generally we've seen that when we launch a new standard with new clauses, there will always be a high number of NCs in the first year, and it kind of falls down through the next year. So for example, culture, we've seen that it always kind of came up in the first years of the audits, and it's kind of dropped off the top 5 list now. In terms of common NCs around in this area, I would say I've seen a lot of NCs mention food contact equipment or surfaces showing sign of rust, flaking paint, coating, and broken parts, among some other things. There's also some mentions of unsuitable welds and joints. The intent of this clause is quite simple, that equipment should be suitable for the intended purpose, and there is emphasis placed on equipment which comes into direct contact with food. And I just want to say that during the BRCGS audit, the auditor will not inspect every seal or bolt or food contact surface that you have, but they need to understand your processes. If you have reviewed the documentation of the equipment, the suitability, what's the site's process for buying new equipment, is the HACCP team involved in these decisions, so things like that. Next, number 4 is 448, which is doors. Again, not a new clause. So maintaining the integrity of doors is very important. Repairing any damages promptly. It's essential to prevent harborage points for pests and to uphold the cleanliness standards as well. Some common issues we've seen here are the doors are not properly sealing. Obviously, they might allow pest ingress. They're damaged doors, and also some related to like the condition of doors, which are like not clean, not secure, things like that. And number 5 on the list is walls. So I think walls and ceilings are highly visible. As soon as like an auditor walks on site, that's what they see first. So, and obviously, you want to ensure like a positive first impression. So don't overlook, the condition of these structural elements. These are quite important. I guess, every item that's attached to the wall, things like shadow boards or PPE dispensers, you might have signage, you might have shelves. Make sure you know what's behind them. Is it does it have enough access to clean it? Is there any chances of condensation behind them, or mold? Sometimes you might move signages, things like that. So if you have like nails or any kind of things like that, make sure you're looking at all that. So it's essential to address, because these kind of things on your walls are going to be potential harborage points. So make sure you're kind of considering all of these. So this is a very quick introduction to the top 5 NCs. And moving on, I just want to say that addressing these challenges in the food industry, it requires a combination of training, effective control measures, use of technology sometimes, and you want to stay up to date with the latest best practices, legislation, things like that. And all these points, these are quite integral to ensuring the safety and quality of the products that you are producing on your site. So in summary, I think the phase getting the basics right underlines the foundational principles that are crucial at the minute. So by focusing on some of these basics like hygiene, chemical management, facility maintenance, the sites can establish a solid framework for not only meeting the requirements of the standard, but you want to create a culture of excellence and safety in food on your food production side. And all these points, as an industry, if we embrace, we'll be able to move on some of these basic non-conformances once and for all. So before I hand it over to Mark to talk about root cause analysis, I want to take a minute to talk about the support available to sites from BRCGS. So just a quick whiz through BRCGS Participate. So it's now called Participate, and it's a new platform. So all food certificated sites have access to Participate. Because it's a new platform. All the people on site who had access to it previously will not be able to access this one automatically. You'll have to create a new login. But this is a part of the service package that BRCGS offers certificated sites, and there is a lot of information on Participate. So there's a lot of guidelines. You can access all your all the BRCGS documents on there. So use those guidelines, for support. And I also want to say that since we launched Food 9, we have delivered a series of webinars called Ask the Experts. And these are on specific topics like, production risk zones, we did listeria management, allergen management, internal audits, a whole load of these. And these are available free of charge to sites on the BRCGS website as well. So there is a lot of information and guidance on there to help you navigate through these non-conformities. So that's my last slide.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Forum. Just a reminder for our participants, you can ask questions throughout the presentation by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. Questions will be answered towards the end of this webinar during the Q&A session. Okay, we will now open up our second poll for today. And you're gonna see it on screen in just a few seconds there. Here it is. And the question is, will your organization be looking for any of the following services in the next 12 months? You can select all that apply: BRCGS Food Safety Training, BRCGS Food Safety Certification, BRCGS Gap Analysis, and or other BRCGS standards. And we're going to give you a few seconds there to vote. We can see your votes coming in. Thank you so much for your participation. Answers still coming in. So will your organization be looking for any of the following services in the next 12 months? And the options are BRCGS Food Safety Training, BRCGS Food Safety Certification, BRCGS Gap Analysis, and other BRCGS standards. Okay, we'll be closing the poll and sharing the results with you. And if Forum would like to comment on this.
Yeah, so I think a lot of sites are looking at BRCGS food safety certification, so we've got more than 53%, but there's other things there. There's training and gap analysis and other standards as well. So thank you guys for answering the poll.
And thank you very much, Forum. And I will now hand over to our next speaker, Mark, to begin his presentation. Over to you, Mark.
Hello. We've had a bit of information on the top non-conformances which are raised from BRC Food 9, but it's always worth having a look at how you deal with non-conformances. So this is just a short recap of the process that you all go through when you have non-conformances raised. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just going through the various elements that you need to consider, and there's just one worked example which is based on sort of a sort of mock-up of an idea of a non-compliance going through. The first point to consider is when you have a non-conformance raised, with all non-conformances, there's got to be a reason why. There's got to be a root cause. It's clear that root cause is the basis for taking effective actions to prevent reoccurrence. And it's often an area which is quite weak, we see when the report's coming in. It's often the case that we see root cause which could be put down as saying operator error, and I don't think that's truly getting to the root cause. That's not bottoming out the problem. It's also extremely important that root cause analysis is conducted by the sites. As auditors, as certification bodies, we can't have any input into finding the root cause. You're the experts on your site. But just to stress that the most important aspect of ever getting any closure or full closure, not having a reoccurrence, is good root cause analysis. Just try to move the slide on. Oh. Root cause analysis can be helped by using various methods. There are various tools that you consider using. I'm not really going to go into details of how these tools work, but they can certainly help you in your approach to carrying out effective root cause analysis. You can get information on these tools, and I do expect a lot of you use these tools already. From a personal point of view, I kind of like 5Y. It sort of is very simple to use, and it's a bit like a small child asking why, and really each point you get a bit further and it peels back an onion to get to the details. So that's my personal favorite, but I wouldn't endorse any particular method at all. There are all some very good methods out there, but I would encourage the use of using a root cause analysis tool. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail on these tools, although in the worked example, I have used 5Y. Root cause analysis leads on to the next stage, which is really actions to prevent reoccurrence. I've used the term actions to prevent reoccurrence rather than preventive action because I think it best describes what you're trying to do. You're trying to look at what is the true reason of the problem, that's the root cause analysis, and then what actions can you take in the future to prevent this non-compliance ever happening again. A lot of the time, the root cause analysis, if it's properly applied, can generate good preventive, or I'd say actions to prevent reoccurrence, which will result in the non-compliance not happening again and not reoccurring. So it is quite an important step, and you can't carry out good actions to prevent reoccurrence without having a true reason for non-compliance taking place. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time working on something which isn't the true problem. The interesting aspect about it is the actions to prevent reoccurrence can take quite a long time, and sometimes these are not necessarily completed by the time of the 28 days that you have to complete your corrective action, but sometimes it's partially seen. So it is often the case that root cause analysis can only really be effectively assessed by the certification body at the next audit, and we should do is spend a lot of time with you looking at your previous non-compliances and assessing where the root cause analysis has occurred, the actions to prevent reoccurrence, have they been put in place, and are they effective? So it is an area that we do check up on the audit, may not be fully verified as part of the 28 days when reviewing corrective action. The part which is probably the most straightforward is correction. This is actions taken really to immediately correct any problems, the problem itself. Typically, this is one of the areas that we'll be checking within the 28 days. And the typical examples are that if there's a gap under the door, that gap has been filled. If there's some remedial action needed on any sort of hygiene issues like cleaning, that piece of equipment has been cleaned, and there's evidence that piece of equipment has been cleaned. It is actions you need to do to address the problem, but they don't really prevent that problem happening again. For instance, if you've a dirty piece of equipment, you can clean it, and yes, the equipment is clean, but what's it prevents it being dirty again? You haven't really got to solve the problem completely. So it is something we do check, we close out on, along with a bit of the actions for, to prevent reoccurrence, but it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. What I probably would like to do is spend a little time going through an example just to explain a bit of what I've been trying to talk about here. And sometimes it's quite useful to go through a specific example. So this is a non-conformity which was raised against clause 4.6.5. I don't think it's one of the most common ones in Food 9, but it is against a new clause of the standard, which is quite a good thing to do. The standard clause really says equipment that is not used or was taken out of service should be cleaned and stored in a manner that does not pose a risk to the product. Equipment stored in the internal production and storage areas should be kept clean. Food contact equipment that has been stored but is not in daily use should be cleaned and, where necessary, disinfected prior to use. So the non-compliance raised by the auditor when they carried the audit was it was noted that during the audit of the production area, the old grading equipment in process area 1 was seen to be dusty and the product debris seemed to be on the surfaces. This was seen as a significant potential contamination risk to the product equipment operating in the area. I haven't put the grading down, but it's kind of drifting towards a major. But the grading is not particularly relevant for this example we're working to. The corrective action was very simple. The old grader was cleaned and photographic evidence was provided that the before and after the cleaning. But let's go into a bit more detail and have a look at potential root cause analysis and preventive action. I've used quite a simplistic sort of 5 whys. So the process is you ask 5 questions: why. As I said, it's very similar to a 2-year-old child asking you those difficult questions, and the analogy is quite good. So the first question: why was it dirty? The equipment had been removed from the cleaning schedule and the hygiene audit checklist. Okay, why was that? The equipment's not used, it could not be covered, it was too big, it was not considered needing for cleaning, needed to be cleaned. Why wasn't it considered needed to be cleaned? So you ask the question again. The risk to the remaining redundant equipment when the line was re-engineered had not been considered in the plant change control risk assessment. So why was that? You dig a bit further. The team set up to conduct the plant change control risk assessment had only considered health and safety risks and not hygiene risks. It was only made up of the project engineers and health and safety manager. Why was that? The plant change control procedure had been initially set up as a risk analysis only for health and safety, but it had been utilised to cover risks without a detailed review of the process or the team undertook the risk. So again, it's actually a new part of the standard where you need to have a change control process. So this particular site had identified that they need to have a change control process. They did have one and thought, good, we'll use that. But they hadn't considered the process sufficiently to consider product safety and product hygiene risks. So the tool they were using was fundamentally not fit for purpose, and that was the root cause. As you can see, it's drifted a long way from a dirty piece of equipment. So this will then lead into the actions to prevent reoccurrence. So what can they do about it? So this is what this company decided to do. And again, it's a fictitious example. It's not based on a true example. They decided they were going to review the plant change control risk assessment to ensure that it covers the assessment of not just health and safety, but product safety and actually environmental risk as well. And they included experts for product safety and environmental risks in their team. This was a relatively straightforward activity, and that they completed that element, assuming that I'm talking about now. So this was done, say, November 2023. As a consequence, they then repeated the risk assessment following the new procedure, and that they completed that a month later in December 23. And the outcome from that risk assessment was that redundant grader and the cleaning, the action was to add the redundant grader to the cleaning schedule and the hygiene checklist immediately, and have a plan for a grader to be removed from the production area during the factory's planned shutdown in February 2024. So what they've done is, to prevent a similar problem happening in the future, they'd made sure that they'd put in a more detailed change control process covering not just health and safety, but environmental concerns, which is not part of this standard, but also product safety and hygiene considerations. And from that, they've got a far better and stronger system to identify the need for maintaining or cleaning old equipment and old equipment left in place, which hadn't been considered at all because it was not a health and safety issue. Or if it had been, it wasn't related to food safety. Interestingly, the first two parts of the actions to prevent reoccurrence would probably happen within a 28-day period of the audit. The final part, which is to remove this redundant equipment, which is the problem in the first place, would only take place after the corrective action has been validated by the certification body and would only be followed up at the next audit. So what would the certification body expect to see from this example? Well, we would expect to see what actions are taken to address the non-compliance immediately. This would mean the photo evidence of before and after cleaning. We would expect to see evidence of the root cause analysis, the RCA, the 5Y in this case. And we would probably expect to see that under the timescales that there'd be some evidence that the actions to prevent reoccurrence have been started or put in place. So there would have been the evidence of the review of the procedure, the process for plant change control, and maybe a new risk assessment undertaken. This would be and can be achieved within the 28-day period on any non-compliance, be it major, minor. The last part, the removal of the equipment, that could not have taken place within that timescale, but we would, as a certification body, when we're walking around the factory at the next audit, say, let's see if that equipment's been removed, and hopefully it would have been. So as you can see, the process for preventing non-compliances reoccurring can be put in place, can be managed within the timescales expected for the BRCGS audits, and hopefully can be effective. As I said, the root cause of maybe reoccurrence of non-compliance is poor root cause analysis, if you get my drift. So it is important to make sure you get to the bottom of the problem. And what can often be seen is that when we receive information coming back after 28 days, the correction is clear, there's evidence of correction, the actions to prevent reoccurrence are defined, but are they the right one? Because the root cause analysis, if it's not detailed, and the evidence, as I said before, quite often is the fact it will say operator error. So forgetting this side of things, if the root cause analysis had been put down as operator error for not cleaning it, and it's been cleaned, it would have missed the point entirely and would have happened on the problem would have reoccurred because there was no mechanism to actually make sure this doesn't happen in the future. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware of this already. I just thought it'd be worthwhile spending a little time talking through what do we do with non-compliances? What do we see as a certification body and information coming back, and what can be done to improve it? Interestingly enough, this same type of discussion as a CB we have with our auditors so that we can manage their expectations, what they should be looking for. Just one last slide to just go through. We've talked about the issue 9, the top non-compliances raised. We talked a bit about root cause analysis. We obviously carry out audits. We can also provide training. There's training on, I would say, specific technical issues. There's training actually on other activities, internal audits, that type of thing. We can provide a very important service for gap analysis and assessment. This is very useful, particularly if you are looking at a new standard, or conversely, you may be looking at an update to a standard, maybe issue 9 to 10. So that's an activity where we can go in and we can audit what you think you have in place to meet the requirements of the standard and tell you they do or not. We carry out second-party audits of supply chain assurance, which is a useful service, and we are looking and can provide help on sustainability and responsible sourcing services. In addition to this, we talk about food all the time, but we do quite a lot of cybersecurity audits, and that's an area which is of importance to everybody. So you may think of LRQA as a certification body who carries out your food audits, but we do carry out other services as well. Okay.
Thank you for that,
that's
Mark.
the last slide. Yeah.
It is indeed. Before starting our Q&A, we have our last poll, which you're going to see on the screen in a few seconds. And we would very much appreciate your participation. The question here is, what other areas within the food industry are of concern to your business? And please select all that apply: sustainability, ethical trade and responsible sourcing, food traceability, cybersecurity, supply chain risk. And you have a few seconds there to send in your answers, please. So what other areas within the food industry are of concern to your business? Sustainability, ethical trade and responsible sourcing, food traceability, cybersecurity, and/or supply chain risk. We can see your answers coming in. Thank you very much. Just a few more seconds, and we can have a look at the results. So we have 59% of you who have chosen sustainability, 43% ethical trade and responsible sourcing, 66% food traceability, 28% cybersecurity, and 60% supply chain risk. Mark or Forum, do you have any comments on the results?
Yes, they don't surprise me. particularly, although I think it's very interesting that the second highest is sustainability. This is, if this question had been asked a few years ago, probably that wouldn't have been so high, but it does show how important people see sustainability is. And I'm guessing this is coming from both the companies themselves and your customers. And again, it's an area where we do some audit work or through our subsidiary companies, and an area where we can actually help. Ethical trade and responsible sourcing, again, relatively high up on the list there. Again, there are links to, there is a BRCGS ethical trade and responsibility sourcing standard, which is a relatively new standard, but could be of some help to you there. Food traceability, yes, I think that's always going to be the highest, and it's no surprise that it's the highest. Again, it's an area where it's always been of importance. Supply chain risk assessment, supply chain risks, again, is another area where you can get help from the BRCGS and also help from LRQA in managing and looking at your supply chain and supplier assurance. So again, I think sustainability is the highlight, the fact that that's so high up on the list there. The others I would kind of expect to see like that. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much for your participation in these polls. Now, Mark and Forum are going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your control panel. So please continue to send them in. Now, let's have a look at the first question. I'm in the process of preparing for our issue 9 audit, but I'm unsure about if we have any weak areas which can lead to non-conformities. What is the best approach here?
I'll answer this question if you don't mind. The important thing is that yes, if the root cause analysis is poor, yes, it can be rejected by the auditor. As I said before, the auditors have been made aware that there is an expectation that the root cause analysis RCA is effective. Obviously, the auditor doesn't make an absolute judgment. They can only make a judgment on the fact that there is evidence of root cause analysis in what's written down. So if it's a case that there is no root cause analysis, there's a guarantee that we're going to reject the report back to you. If the root cause analysis is weak, there's certainly the auditor will come back and ask questions about your root cause analysis. So there is a potential that even weak root cause analysis can be rejected back. It's quite a difficult area to answer this because it's not black and white. Because as I said before in the presentation, we've never really said that the auditor is going to specify root cause analysis. It's up to the site to actually carry out their root cause analysis. But if it looks bad, we will say it looks bad. And that can actually delay the certification process, because bearing in mind that this happens at the end of the 28-day period, potentially, what you don't want is the auditor to go back and say, I don't like this, I need you to provide more information, because we are at the end of that period, that window for the submission of actions, not at the start. So it's an area that will delay certification, which is not good for the company, and it's actually not good for the certification body, to be honest. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question is how to get past the most common hygiene and housekeeping non-conformities. One of you would like to take this, please?
Yeah, I can take it. So I would say, yeah, it's quite a basic one. So the hygiene and housekeeping non-conformities. So there is other areas of the standard that you could look at which influences these. So one of them is culture, 112. So a culture within the food manufacturing side would strongly influence your hygiene and housekeeping practices. And a culture that prioritizes cleanliness, safety, and responsibility and creates an environment where employees are more likely to adhere to the best practices. So things like leadership, training, communication, and all these values kind of shape into the culture on site. So a few weeks ago, we did a webinar where we discussed, giving hygiene a place at the table. So kind of, include the hygiene team in your decisions, use their knowledge, the operatives who are actually using your cleaning instruction cards, get their feedback on how to make them more efficient. Get the hygiene managers on your HACCP team, get them involved in your production huddles or things like that. Just encourage collaboration, so that will influence the hygiene housekeeping on site. I think another one that comes to mind is clause 344, which is your hygiene and housekeeping inspections. So are they being carried out on a correct risk-based schedule? Do you need more of these inspections? Get someone else, a fresh pair of eyes to carry out these inspections, because if it's like the same QA team doing the same inspections all the time, they might kind of overlook some of these things. Even 411.2 is the frequency of your cleaning. So, is it adequate? Look at that. So all of these feed into your hygiene and housekeeping non-conformities and kind of making it better.
Thank you, Forum. Another question for you, I believe. How do you recommend handling hygiene challenges in high traffic areas where contamination risks are elevated?
So, well, it depends on the site and the layout, your operation. But I would say, get your HACCP team together, walk the route. Again, involve people from other areas. I would say some of the tips for, high traffic areas would be implementing more frequent cleaning schedules. You would have probably you can assign dedicated people for real-time cleanup. You can have strategic placing of your hygiene stations in the high traffic areas. Just some of the tips there, but again, it depends on your site, your layout, your operation, everything else.
Thank you very much, Forum. Our next question is, we are preparing for our first BRCGS food audit. If we did get non-conformances at the audit and we submitted the corrective action and root cause analysis, is this checked by the auditor? And if yes, can it be rejected? And would this have an impact on our certification? Perhaps Mark can answer this one. Thank you.
Yes, the simple answer is yes. Yes, it can. It's very similar to the answer before. If the root cause analysis, which we covered, but also if the actions to prevent reoccurrence are not really linked to the finding. Also, if the correction is obviously inadequate, then the auditor will not accept this and will ask for more evidence corrective action. As it's your first audit, you do potentially have a bit more time. So first audit can be extended for minor non-compliances almost under concession to greater than 28 days. But normally you expect the corrective action to be completed within 28 days on the findings, and certainly those for majors. So yes, the auditor will not just accept anything which is submitted to them, and ultimately if the corrective action is not seen as effective, or the root cause analysis isn't clearly defined, or the actions for prevention of reoccurrence is not adequately defined, that will prevent certification. certification decisions are only made when the non-compliances have been addressed. And yes, ultimately what would happen is if it wasn't addressed and wasn't corrected, it would mean re-audit, a full re-audit. So yes, it very much does. So it's an area that you need to consider putting quite a lot of effort into.
Thank you, Mark. Next question. From the presentation, we can see that the largest number of major non-conformances are raised on clause 1.1.10 relating to allowing the audit to take place after the due date. What is the reason for this, and are you surprised that this is the most common reason for a major non-conformance to be raised? Thank you.
Shall I? Well, we could both answer it, but the first part, the reason why I think forum's covered already, it's because the audit's taking place late. Am I surprised that it's the highest cause of major non-conformance? I certainly am. To be honest, that came as a huge surprise to me, looking at that information. Of all the requirements in the standard, it's amazing that that's the biggest cause of major non-conformance, is the fact that an audit is conducted late. And also bear in mind that if it was late because the certification body had not planned and conducted the audit before the due date, then you can get a concession not to raise a major non-conformance. So taking that into account, the main cause of major non-compliance is sites wanting or having a late audit. Yeah, it's the most avoidable major non-conformance you could possibly have, I would suggest. It's nothing to do with your systems on site. It's just that the audit was late. You had the companies have decided to run their audit late. I'm completely mystified by that one, to be honest. I don't know if forum's got any comments on it.
No, you're right. It's totally unavoidable. And like I said, it's not that big a number. So if you kind of think that, oh, it's the big, topmost major non-conformity, but if you see the amount of non-conformities raised, it's not that high a number in the whole big scheme of, greater than 110,000 non-conformities raised. But it could be something as simple as, sometimes sites change CBs, and they've not signed the contract on time for the CB to plan the audit within the window, things like that. And we're getting a lot of unannounced audits, so they need to make sure that they are doing it within the correct window. And we do not allow late audits. It's not the way we want to do it. But yeah, so I guess it's very avoidable.
Thank you both. Another question: what considerations should be made for the design of equipment to facilitate easier cleaning?
I can take this one. I would say you should have surfaces that are smooth, non-porous. There should be minimum crevices, because your contaminants can accumulate in the crevices. Select materials that are easy to clean and maintain. And again, regular inspections of equipment is quite important.
Thank you, Forum. Our next question is 538. Equipment cleaning procedures shall be designed to remove or reduce to an acceptable level any potential cross-contamination, cross-contact of allergens. What is considered an acceptable level? Thank you.
I'll answer this question. It depends what you really mean. I think there's two questions there. There is acceptable level of cleaning and acceptable level for allergen cross-contamination, and they're kind of slightly different in what the expectations are. Dealing with the equipment cleaning, if you meant to reduce to acceptable levels any potential contamination from a sort of purely hygiene point of view, microbiological review, this level of cleaning is probably something which you'd be considering as part of your HACCP about, because you can't generalize what is acceptable cleaning, because if you have a process like a flour mill, sugar refining process, the chances are the risk is going to be physical contamination. So you're working on visually clean as your level of acceptance. If you are dealing with high risk environment potentially, then you'll be looking at microbial contamination and reducing that to acceptable limits. So again, what's acceptable in cleaning is very much coming out of your HACCP controls, and it's, again, dare I say it, for you to decide. The other aspect about cross-contamination from an allergen point of view is normally, and again, I've got to be careful here, that you can actually check acceptance limits. There are defined acceptance limits for various allergens. This can be a set limit, or it can be a recognized industry set limit, or just the presence of. So what you would be doing is, and the standard covers that, is if you are cleaning for hygiene, for allergen control, you need to verify that that clean is adequate to remove the risk of allergen cross-contamination. And specifically, you would need to carry out tests on previous product run after the clean down, just to validate that process. And that's been in the standard for a very long time. Interestingly enough, obviously the nature of the allergen has an impact on acceptance limits and if you can do it or not. You know, for instance, liquids are easy to clean, powders are fundamentally quite difficult to remove. So that's another implication in there. This 5.38 clause is more, I would suggest, about hygienic cleaning, cross-contamination, either microbial or physical contamination, because the allergen control aspects after cleaning is covered in the allergen section of the standard anyway. So yeah, it's always a way. Your HACCP should be where you be defining what's acceptable, because it's going to be specific to the product. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mark. This will be our last question of the day. In seasonal process industry, where the entire production carried out is only for 3 months, how do you schedule internal audits in 4 different dates as mentioned in internal audit clause? Could you please guide us on this point? Thank you.
I'll take this one, Mark. So if the site is open only for the part of the year, then I think there's little value in completing the audits when the site is shut. So, you know, but there must be a system for the management for things like, you know, startup processes or, you know, and internal audits, things like that. So, you know, so they should start, you know, expected to start before the season commences. So you make sure that, you know, you're auditing your startup processes, things like that. The HACCP program should be audited to make sure it's up to date for the forthcoming production. If there's going to be any changes in your seasonal production, the hygiene and fabrication is intact before your production starts, your staff training is complete. So things like that you can probably schedule before your season starts, but the remaining areas can be completed through your season. So if it lasts for 3 months, you can kind of do it at different points in that. The aim is not to do like a BRCGS style 2-day or 3-day audit. You know, you want to split it through the different times of production. So yeah, hope that helps.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to both Forum and Mark, and to all our participants for attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email over the next few days with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of LRQA and our presenters, Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.